Begin our coverage then of the aftermath of that high-level meeting, a working visit between the United States and South Africa. One of the people who were part of the South African delegation was the president of COSATU, Ngcaweni, who corrected the US President Donald Trump on remarks about South Africa's land reform policy as well as violence, alleged violence, which is said to have been targeting white Afrikaner farmers. Losi was part of President Ramaphosa's delegation, as I was saying, clarifying that crime in South Africa is in fact widespread and more of a national problem. She says that South Africa has a gender-based violence problem that affects all races.
At the center of it all, for me, it is exactly what Mr. Rupert has said, the importance of us growing the economy. We have always emphasized when we were here and kept on coming and negotiating on AGOA that the 600 US companies that are based in South Africa, as you said, President Ramaphosa, 500,000 jobs will be wiped out. We need more foreign direct investment in our country. We are not just talking about those that will lose employment, but we are talking about over 40% of people that are unemployed, that have no hope of ever finding a job. And we think that, correctly, as they have said, that we need to deal with the issue of porous borders in our country so that everyone that comes in is documented. We also need to, and I would have thought that the minister would address the issue of land expropriation and how the policy works in South Africa. Recently, President, as you were preparing to come here on the news, in, I think it was on Natal, there was a handover of farms. And white farmers were saying, we are donating the land, but also there's a willing buyer, willing seller in South Africa. So there is no expropriation without compensation. But it is a willing buyer, willing seller. And that white farmer was even saying, President, that the government is even paying more in buying the land than what the land is worth of. And I think those are the realities, President, that we must say that we need to address, of course, but also the importance of agriculture linked to AGOA. People rely on it, and I think, as Retief said, for survival and living. But lastly, for me, President, is also the issue of the crime statistics. There is no doubt about it that we are a violent nation, for a number of reasons, and we're not condoning anything.
Let's speak further about the working visit between the United States and South Africa. Bring in the principal of the National School of Government, Professor Busani Ngcaweni. A very good evening to you, Professor. Good to have you on The Full View. So we've just been listening to Ngcaweni, the COSATU president, and in your piece, you've likened her to a Rakgadi, that is the aunt from the paternal side, so a paternal aunt. I wonder how you rate the value of her contribution yesterday in the Oval Office, given how tense the situation had already become when she intervened.
Well, thank you, Tembi. Well, she did really act like a Rakgadi. That is what is expected in situations like those ones, where you de-escalate, you give a perspective, you clarify issues as crystal clear as she did, and you give a context. As we have said, when there is lobola negotiation or any other problems in a household, that is a role that Rakgadis play, that their interventions are not meant to fuel an already volatile situation, but they are there to give clarity and to calm things down. And that is exactly what she did. The context was the most important part of the intervention that she made.
And on that score, again, for those who may have missed the beginning of our conversation, we're using the lobola analogy because that's what you've taken in making sense of what we watched unfold in the last 24 hours in Washington. Overall, when a lobola delegation, then staying with that analogy, goes to a request request a woman's hand in marriage, they are coordinated in their message, in their request. The South African delegation has been criticized because there were gaps in terms of the story, especially in dealing with the unsubstantiated claims of an Afrikaner genocide and the land question. How could that have been made better?
Well, those who go into lobola negotiations, in situations like those, it's like going to pay lobola in a high-profile family environment. Those things are likely to happen. What is most important is what does the head of the delegation do? Does the head of the delegation stick to the script? In this instance, as a head of the delegation, using the lobola metaphor, that is exactly what the president did. He had his message, he stuck to the script, he understood what the people of South Africa expected from him, as well as other people worldwide who had well wishes for that delegation that went in there. Of course, it happens in these type of situations that, people will say the kind of things that were said. Any of the uncles in the lobola negotiation, once they see the bride, they might end up saying, well, I think I have seen her before. And there are instances where people could even talk about where they've seen the bride. It could have been in a tavern or anywhere else and so on. Those things are expected. The important thing is, what does the head of the delegation say? He's there with a particular purpose. There's an expectation at home that you will come back with a yes answer. That the family agrees that they will lend us the hand of the bride, and that later when the bride appears herself, the will-be bride, that she will agree to be part of the new family. And it is what exactly happened. It's a big stage. People are likely to do that. But there's also a context here that the president was very clear when he made his introduction, that in his phone call with the president of the U.S., the president of the U.S. had actually identified certain people that he wished for them to be part of that delegation. These are people familiar to him because they've played golf together and were part of it. There's actually two options. One is that it could have been just a common script where people say one thing, as it were. You will see that they were choreographed, or that people could be free to express what they said. Of course, we don't have to agree with what they said, that they go and vent and say those things which are already known. But what matters is the fact that the president stuck to the script, and of course the Rakhadi and even Rupert might have done better.
How effective is the sticking to the script when you consider that as they left, the President of the United States, Donald Trump's mind was unchanged, and he commands a large following who, even after the claims of an Afrikaner genocide have been fact-checked and debunked, is still repeating the message. So how effective was the show from South Africa?
No, we don't know that the mind was unchanged. We don't know. That is why in the article you are referring to, which prompted this invitation, I clarified that later on, in the press conference that the president held, using the lobola negotiation, you can liken that to the reporting back to the family. The president was clear about what transpired, especially in a private meeting that was held. He clarified, he told the nation that this was what was discussed, and that there is a rolling program of action now to negotiate trade-related matters, for an example. We don't know the rest. So we don't know how much was the bride price eventually. What we know is that negotiations did take place. What we know that the trade industry and competition minister was cited as a person who will continue to negotiate the trade. The president mentioned that.
And you're citing the version that the president gave in his media interaction with the South African press contingent about 2 hours after what we witnessed in the Oval Office. I said the president of the United States, his mind was unchanged, at least from when we heard him speak for himself. But nonetheless, how does South Africa then navigate this relationship going forward, given the challenges that persist to some degree?
Well, again, if we use that analogy, if the bride agrees and comes over to join the new family, that bride must deal and manage those contradictions that exist in the new family. They become part of your contradictions. In this instance, South Africa has to navigate and manage the contradictions of a relationship with the second biggest trading partner, which is the US, as much as it should do with the largest trading partner, which is China, as well as the EU, which is a very important trading partner, as well as others. It's part and parcel of the contradiction that have to be managed with astute leadership, and that the president and everybody in the state, all the way to the most junior people who are in the embassies, have to exercise the utmost of statecraft available to them in order to manage this. We must respect and understand that the US, like all other countries, will have their own politics, their own contradictions, priorities, and national interest, as they call them. Ours is to navigate those.
And lastly, then, in another piece that you've written, in fact, about the US-South Africa relationship, you said that do not mistake our contradictions for failure. How do we persuade countries around the world not to do that when the contradictions, the divisions, are themselves being exposed by South Africans?
Look, we shouldn't actually internationalize our national contradictions, and those must not be abused by everybody, because those are our contradictions. We don't do that with any other nation. Every other country has got its own contradictions. They may be racial, it could be inequality, it could be crime, or any other form of national contradictions. Those should not be exploited. What South Africa must do, as the president clarified in the State of the Nation address, as well as when he was addressing the nation on the 27th of April, is that there has to be this process of a national dialogue, which ultimately must identify a clear pathway towards resolving national contradictions, which include unemployment, which include crime, which include poor education outcomes, and so on. And every other social partner must come to the party in the resolution of those. And those who are in the civil service, like myself, our contribution toward the resolution of the national contradictions is to make sure that we serve and serve diligently, and not do only other funny thing that will disadvantage the people of South Africa and abuse their trust.
Could the president then, as the head of the delegation, have pushed back harder, corrected more of the falsehoods from what we saw? Because ultimately, the cameras of the world have now beamed that, and that is what is spreading. Should he have done more in the moment to say, actually, this is the actual crime picture in numbers and not what has been distorted?
You don't do that in lobola negotiations, unfortunately. You have to be polite, you have to maintain the decorum. And when you are visiting another head of state, that's what you do. You allow them to speak, you respond when spoken to, and that's part of the architect of diplomacy that must be observed. So it is impossible that he could have done that in that instance. In fact, interestingly, international media throughout today, from west to the east, all of it has been really on the side of South Africa, explaining, giving South African a perspective of what is happening. I come from a township called Inanda. There are more people who died there last year than farmers who have died in the past 5 years. But I can't expect the president to pull out those numbers or cards and put them in front of the US president in that instance. I think he understood the protocol, he understood the decorum he had to maintain, and also ultimately he knows the facts. And I think US administrators themselves know the facts.
Professor Busani Ngcaweni, head of the National School of Government, good to have your time on SABC today.